Large number of American women taking jobs in the war industries during World War II, the National War Labor Board urged employers in 1942 to voluntarily make adjustments which equalized wage or salary rates paid to females with the rates paid to males for comparable quality and quantity of work on the same or similar operations. Not only did employers fail to pay attention to this voluntary request, but at the war's end, most women were pushed out of their new jobs to make room for returning veterans. Until the early 1960s, newspapers published separate job listings for men and women. Jobs were categorized according to sex, with the higher-level jobs listed almost exclusively under Help Wanted Male. In some cases, the ads ran identical jobs under male and female listings, but with separate pay scales. Separate, of course, meant unequal. Between 1950 and 1960, women with full-time jobs earned on average between 59 to 64 cents for every dollar their male counterparts earned in the same job. It wasn't until the passage of the Equal Pay Act on June 10, 1963, effective June 11, 1964, that it became illegal to pay women lower rates for the same job strictly on the basis of their sex. Demonstrable differences in seniority, merit, the quality or quantity of work, or other considerations might merit different pay, but gender could no longer be viewed as a drawback on one's resume. The act was gradually expanded over the next decade to include a larger segment of the workforce, and between June 1964 and January 1971, back wages totaling more than $26 million were paid to 71,000 women. Two landmark court cases served to strengthen and further define the Equal Pay Act. The first one was Schultz versus Wheaton Glass Company in 1970 in the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Third Circuit. This ruled that jobs needed to be substantially equal but not identical to fall under the protection of the Equal Pay Act. An employer cannot, for example, change the job titles of women workers in order to pay them less than men. The second case was Corning Glass Works versus Brennan in 1974 in the U.S. Supreme Court. This ruled that employers cannot justify paying women lower wages because that is what they traditionally received under the going market rate. A wage differential occurring simply because women would not work at the low rates paid to women was unacceptable. The blatant discrimination apparent in these court cases seems archaic today, as does the practice of sex-segregated job listings. The workplace has changed radically in the decades since the passage of the Equal Pay Act, but what has not changed radically, however, is women's pay. The wage gap has narrowed, but it is still significant. Women earned 59% of the wages men earned in 1963. In 2012, they earned 80.9% of men's wages, an improvement of about half a penny or $1 earned every year. Why is there such a disparity? A variety of explanations for the persistent wage gap have been offered. One is that older women are factored in the wage gap equation, and many of these women from an older generation work in jobs still subject to the attitudes and conditions of the past. In contrast, the rates for young women coming of age in the 1990s reflect women's social and legal advances. In 2010, for example, women under 25 working full-time earn 93.8% of men's salaries compared to those 55 to 64, who earn 75.2% of what men made.
Full-time working women in the U.S. are only paid about 79% of what men are paid. This gap has noticeably lessened since the 1970s because of progress made by women in education, which is good, but there is still a very evident problem of the wage gap in society today. The wage gap differs for each situation, but affects women of all ages, backgrounds, and educational achievement. More specifically, Asian American women have the smallest pay gap from men, earning about 90% of what men earn, while Hispanic and Latino American women typically earn only 54% of what men earn. Now, the pay gap grows with age just as earnings of men and women do. In a few years out of college, full-time working women earn around 80% of what men earn, and that number gets increasingly worse as time goes on. And 10 years after college, women's earnings are only about 69% of men's earnings. Attending college and getting a degree does increase earnings, but the college degrees affect earnings differently. Female students tend to be more involved in lower-paying jobs such as education, health, and psychology. Women are paid the majority for these, but still not the same amount as men are in female-dominated professions. In mixed and male-dominated jobs, like biological sciences and mathematics, women are only paid about 75% of what men are. Men and women often mistake this pay gap as just a result of occupational choices by women, but typically, women who are in the same or similar professions as men are still not paid the same. The Equal Pay Act, which ensures that men and women are equally and fairly paid for substantially equal work, has been in effect for over 50 years but needs to be updated and improved. It needs to be ensured that women aren't financially penalized for being parents and taking time to tend to their children. Now, by raising the earnings of women in low-paying occupations, it can allow for more women to engage in higher-paying jobs. The gender pay gap can also often result in around $10,000 in lost wages every year. A major case that involves this issue was Ledbetter versus Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company. Addressing the unfair wage gap, in 2009, President Obama signed the Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Act. The initial ruling by the Supreme Court refused to provide people with protection of pay discrimination towards women. Immediately after this decision, Congress worked to pass the Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Act of 2009. This secured the long-established law that assured that men and women who face unfair pay discrimination in the workplace are able to maintain their rights under federal law.
There are some solutions that people can take to solve this problem. The first solution is to implement a pay transparency. A pay transparency allows employees to discuss their pay and benefits without a fear of reprisal. This solution was called to attention during the Ledbetter versus Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company court case. In her lawsuit against her former employer, Ms. Ledbetter claimed that she earned a significant amount of money less than her male coworker due to sex discrimination. Ms. Ledbetter argued that pay discrimination is harder to detect than other kinds of discrimination due to the secrecy surrounding pay. Implementing a pay transparency would have allowed Ms. Ledbetter to discover that her boss violated the equal pay laws a lot sooner, and she would have been able to fix the problem without going to court. Pay transparency levels the playing field for women and minorities, but it also helps the employers because it provides them access to a diverse pool of qualified talent, and that could really improve their business. Sometimes it completely affects the situation, and it happens more often than people think. This video is an example of a basic sex discrimination situation.
How'd you like these apples?
A recent study out of Yale University that is interesting, where professors were given the identical resume. One had the name John on the top, and one had the name Jennifer on top. And the male candidate was rated more favorably, and
Really?
they were offered on average $4,000 more than the female candidate.
Okay, so it seems we either address the root of this problem and fight entrenched sexism in our society, or all women simply change their names to John. Sure, it'll be confusing for a while, but you'll have $4,000 extra a year just to take the edge off the confusion. And also, don't despair just yet, because apparently, if women can just hang in there, there is hope.
If you're unmarried and childless between the ages of 35 and 43, the statistics show you make $1.08 on average to every male dollar.
So there you have it, ladies. If you can just remain single, not accidentally have children, and never turn 44, you're gonna be golden.
People don't realize how often this occurs. Another solution to this situation is to eliminate negotiation. Statistics show that women don't do as well in negotiations as men. Actually, women try to avoid negotiation altogether because they don't feel comfortable. Women usually accept the first offer that is presented to them just to avoid negotiation. Now, with the women not negotiating, that gives men the opportunity to negotiate their pay even more. The solution to this problem is to get rid of it altogether. Don't make it an option to raise their pay. This will ensure that everyone has the same pay based on their work ethics and not their negotiation skills.